Welcome back. Now that we understand what we're looking at when we open Blender, it's time to talk about 3D space and how to navigate it in Blender. There are several topics we'll need to understand to move freely and accurately in 3D space. We'll need to understand the 3D axes, the 3D grid, Blender units, view angles, view types, view modes, and navigation controls. So let's break that down. In the lower left of the viewport is a corner of a square. It's got a red, a green, and a blue line. This is the mini axis. It represents the three axes of 3D space, and it's how we determine something's location by coordinates. We haven't yet discussed selecting and moving objects, so just follow along with this next bit if your cube isn't selected. We'll use our viewport properties panel for these moves. Remember the N hotkey from the last video? Let's bring that up. At the top, we can access the coordinates for our cube. Currently, they are 0, 0, 0, or at the center of our graph or world. Let's put in some numbers. For now, let's leave X at 0, and let's put Y and Z both at 4. Our cube moves to the proper place on the grid by moving that many Blender units, which are the little squares of the grid. I left X at 0 to demonstrate another function of 3D coordinates, negative numbers. Since our world starts at a center of 0, 0, 0, when we want to move something, Blender needs to know which way to move it. Let's enter a -4 into X and see what happens. Our cube moved away from our view. If we had entered a +4, our cube would have moved towards us. This positive and negative system works on all three of the axes. For the next section, we're going to need our numpad. Now, if you don't have a numpad on your system, you can use your number row, but we're going to have to change something in Blender. We'll have to go up to File, User Preferences, and go down and check Emulate Numpad. Now, let's go back to our viewport properties and set our cube back to a world space of 0, 0, 0. Alright, now let's discuss view types. There are two in Blender. One is perspective and one is orthographic. Perspective view is like drawing train tracks going away into the distance. It gives a sense of depth. Orthographic is like a technical drawing where the lines stay the same to show exact specifications. We can toggle these views with the number 5 key on our numpad. Now, let's look at view angles. Try hitting number 1 on your numpad. You can see we get a front view. 3 gives us a side view, and 7 a top view. With your numpad, the 1, 3, and 7 being in the corners is a little easier to remember. If you're working with your number keys up top, that might seem a little less intuitive, but just imagine a numbers pad and those 3 corners are your front view, your side view, and your top view. We can see which view we're in the upper left-hand corner of our viewport. But what if we want to see the left side instead of the right, or the bottom instead of the top? If we want to do that, we can simply hold Control while selecting our 1, 3, or 7 keys, and you will get the opposite side of the corresponding key. Now, in our viewport, we can see our little cube, and right now it's just kind of flat looking color-wise, not just because we don't have any textures on it. It's also because that's the shading mode that we have selected. Shading modes are how our cube displays on our screen. We can find these in our viewport header right here. We'll come back to a few of them later, but let's look at the ones we'll use most often. And you can, of course, always play on your own. By default, we're in solid shading. Now let's switch to wireframe. Now our cube displays as a wireframe of the elements that make it up. We can also try texture. Now right now we don't have any textures, so there isn't much of a change. But you can see that the cube now reacts to the light in the scene. We'll play with these more down the line. For now, let's set it back to solid shading. It should also be noted that there is a hotkey here, and that hotkey is Z, and that will toggle you back and forth between your solid and your wireframe shading. And at last, we reach navigation. Moving in the 3D scene is pretty simple. It might be a little counterintuitive if you've worked in a different 3D package. However, soon it will be second nature. Let's try moving around a little bit. With our mouse in our viewport, hold down the middle mouse button and move it around the scene. You can see that rotates us within our scene on whatever is the center of our scene. To zoom, we can just scroll the mouse wheel in and out. If you don't have a mouse wheel and you have a mouse button, we can also click Control, middle mouse button, and move the cursor up and down. To pan the scene, hold Shift and middle click and drag. Now, if you go crazy and lose your scene, hit Shift-C, and Blender will bring you back to your scene center. Now, that was quite a bit of information in a pretty short period of time. So let's review a little bit. We took a look at 3D space and how the grid and Blender units help us move objects in it. We also learned how to use the numpad to change our view. Remember, 1, 3, and 7 for front, side, and top, and Control for the opposite with our numbers. We learned the difference between perspective and orthographic views. We covered a few of the different shading modes, such as solid, wireframe, and texture. And we learned how to navigate 3D space in our viewport. So let's quiz and see how we did. Question 1. In order, which numbers on the numpad result in a top, a right, and a front view? Which key lets us choose the opposite of those? Number 3, which mouse click lets us rotate our view? Number 4, which hotkey opens viewport properties and lets us enter X, Y, and Z coordinates manually? Alright, if you got all those, outstanding. I'll see you in the next video.